Hi, my name is Anna Maria. I am a geographer and a worm farmer, and as a worm farmer, what I do is that I use red wiggler worms to transform food waste into natural fertilizer full of nutrients that you can use on your plants. Welcome to building my veggie garden.
Welcome to a new episode of Building My Veggie Garden. Today we are talking about worm farming and the amazing benefits for our garden. We invited a special guest, geographer Anna Maria, an expert in vermiculture or worm composting. She will talk to us about worm farming and give us a demonstration of what she does to get homemade fertilizer from food waste using worms. She will explain to us what vermiculture and vermicast mean and what is the connection with worm farming.
Vermiculture is the activity of using worms to transform your food scraps into nutrient-rich amendment that you can put on your soil so your plants can grow stronger and bigger. And vermicast is the same as worm poop or worm castings, is the byproduct that you have after the worms digest all the food scraps.
What are the different types of worm farms?
There's two main ways that you can do worm farming. One of them is the tray stack system, which is different trays stacked on top of each other, and each tray has holes so the worms can burrow and then they can travel through each tray. And the other way that you can do worm farming is horizontal worm farming. You can use a bin, for example, a storage bin, by adding a spigot at the end and some holes around it, and the worms travel here. They move from one side to another instead of vertical.
What kind of worms are best for vermiculture?
The type of worms that I use in my worm farms are red wiggler worms, and although there are multiple types of composting worms in Florida environment because it's warmer than the rest of the US, the best type of worms, in my opinion, are red wiggler worms.
How do you build a worm farm?
What we're gonna be using for our worm farm is the Worm Nerd worm farm. It's a really small worm farm that is in a design of a tray stack system. When you're gonna start feeding your worm farm, it's important to do it in the proper order, because if you feed it out of order, the whole process won't be effective and you won't be able to produce the worm castings that you want to create. So when you get your worm farm, you put it together, you put all the layers on top of each other, but when you're gonna feed for the first time, you're only gonna feed one tray, and then eventually you're gonna keep adding the other trays. We're first gonna add the food scraps. So I, for the most part, use a 5-gallon container to store my food scraps at home, just because it's a great way to keep all pests away and anything that can try to go inside of my composter. So it's just a regular 5-gallon bucket. Whichever size of container that you use, you really want to make sure that you use a container that has a pressure tight lid or a twist on. This is just a collection of food for the last couple of days. When I feed my worms, I feed them on a schedule, and I feed them only once a week. For the most part, the food scraps, you want to collect fruits and vegetables. You want to keep away anything that is spicy or anything that's hard or anything that has too much acidity or it's very citric, because that can alter the pH of your final product and that can also harm the worms. So no meat, no dairy. It's important to keep in mind that the worms do not have teeth. They are very similar to chickens. They have a gizzard and they digest the food by using an ingredient as grit. In my case, what I use is eggshells, and the eggshells, they serve as grit, and the worms use it so they can digest the food better. So what I do is that I collect my eggshells throughout the week, And after I collect the eggshells, I use a coffee grinder, just like this one. And then I grind the eggshells and then I turn them into powder. So this powder form is what I use for grit with the worms. So every time that I feed the food scraps, I also include the grit. And the other ingredient that we need when we feed our worms, it's also our bedding. The worms need it to burrow. What I'm gonna do right now is feed the worm farm. So I'm gonna grab a handful of the food scraps that I've been saving throughout the week. So I just grab a handful of the food scraps and I'm gonna describe what I have on my hand. So it's just pretty much kale and some green beans and some squash right over here. And I have also some cantaloupe skin and banana plantain skin. After I add the food, I'm going to add the grit, which I described before is the shredded eggshells. The next thing, a combination of shredded paper and untreated mulch. So I mix these two ingredients and then I put them on here. And then of course we do want to add the worms. So I'm gonna find some worms from over here and put them in there. So here we go. Here are some of the red wigglers. The worms breathe through their skin. That's why their skin is moist. So what I do is that I add some water. One of the other ingredients that you can also use for grit is coffee grounds. Now all I'm doing is that I'm gonna mix it to make sure everything is even distributed. And the next thing that I do is put my lid and then I will leave it alone for about a week. A week has gone by, it's time to feed the worm farm again. So we're gonna take the lid off and then we're gonna do the same exact procedure. And we're gonna add food until it reaches about half of it, half of the tray. So we're gonna do it until about here. So let's say we do that the following week. Once we do that, we're gonna add the next tray on top. And then we're gonna follow the same exact process. We're gonna add the food, we're gonna add the food scraps, and all throughout, and we're gonna add the grit, we're gonna add the bedding, and then we're gonna put the lid on top and we're gonna leave it alone for another week or two, fill it up. Once that's filled, then we're gonna add the next layer and we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna add the food scraps, the grit, the bedding. We're gonna put our lid, and then by then, everything that we add on this bottom tray should be completely digested by the worms, and all those food scraps would be turned into worm castings. This is what we want to see, and that's how we know that everything is ready.
How do we harvest the worm castings?
To separate the worms from the worm castings, I grab some type of tray, something like this for example, and then I empty everything out in the shape of a pyramid. After I create this pyramid shape, what I do is that I start clearing on the top, because as I clear from the top, the worms that may be in there, they will be in the middle and they will start burrowing. As you see, there's one right there. Then if I see a worm, I just grab it and either I separate it, but if there's a lot of worms, they start burrowing. For example, see, here's another one. So what I do is that I have a separate area where I start placing my harvested worm castings. So I'm gonna place them over here. So now I'm gonna, again, make that shape and then keep clearing that top layer. The reason why I keep cleaning only the top layer, it's because if I, for example, grab from here from the bottom, there's gonna be a lot of worms because the bottom layer has all the worms hiding away from the light. So I place the worms on one side of my tray and then I place my harvested worm castings on the other side of the tray. So here, you see there's another worm right here. So I'm separating the worms by hand. Once you have all this product separated, then what I do is that I let it age out for a little bit. Probably I leave it tops 2-3 weeks. I leave it alone. and then it dries out a little bit, and then this is what it looks like. And what I do is that I use it as an ingredient for all my soil mixes. So right here, this soil mix is a starter soil mix for seedlings, and it's worm castings with coco coir and a little bit of untreated mulch. And we use the worm castings as the ingredient that is the fertilizer. The final product has humic acids. It has all these different community of microorganisms that are helping plants and roots uptake nutrients much faster. It makes them more resistant to pests. It makes them grow stronger, bigger, prettier, and also it helps the structure of the soil because it helps aerate the soil and retain water. Why not make your own soil? Why not transform your own food scraps? And the worms are a great way for you to do it. So with that, what I also want to mention is that the worm castings can be used as an ingredient for either seedling starters or for your soil mix whenever you're doing transplants. But you can also use it in a liquid form, and in the liquid form it's called a worm tea. And it's very important to keep in mind that the worm tea is very different from the leachate. The worm tea is made whenever you are using your final product, fresh worm castings, and you add them to a container, for example a 5-gallon bucket, and then you add your water and you mix that. And if you want to go a step further, you can even put a water pump in there, and you can bring oxygen to the mix. You can put it for 24 to 48 hours to cook, so to speak. Once it's finished, that worm tea, you can use it either as a top dressing on the base of a plant, or you can also use it as a spray, and you can spray your plants. But it's important to make sure that you're using your worm castings to make your worm tea. Your leachate, it's pretty much the liquid that comes out of here, and that is pretty much trash juice. It does have some nutrient content, but it's very, very possible that it also has pathogens or bacteria that could be harmful for you. So whenever I collect my leachate, what I do with it is that I use it on my non-edible plants, on my garden that it's not edible. For example, my trees or my succulents or anything at my palm trees, anything around my garden that I will not directly consume, that's where I use my leachate. So if they have any questions, please feel free to contact me. You can take either a group class, you can do a one-on-one class with me, we can do a workshop. I've set up worm farms at different schools. I've worked with different nonprofits to bring worm farming to different schools or different locations. Everybody can do it. What is most exciting is that the worms are really sensitive little creatures that depend on us. So as long as we can give them some love and attention and care, they can really make a really big difference.
Visit her website, also her social media for tips on worm farming. As always, thank you for tuning in. It's been a pleasure having you in our garden. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our social media channels. See you next time. Bye-bye.